sewing and working with fabric when I was about 8 years old. I was in 4-H, and that's when I learned how to sew and make my own clothes and different things like that. When I was in high school, in home economics class, our teacher taught us how to quilt, and that was the first time I had ever quilted in my life. At that time, we had to hand piece all the little pieces, and then we hand quilted, and my first object that I ever made was a pillow. I didn't really take up quilting until later on, probably about 6 or 7 years ago. I started making quilts for each one of my kids. When I was little, my mom used to quilt, but she would have quilting bees at her house, and my grandma and my mom and a lot of the town ladies would all get together, and they would set up the great big quilting frame, bring in chairs, and they would all sit around this quilting frame and quilt for at least half a day. And as a kid, I would sit there and watch them, and a lot of times I would get in trouble because I was crawling underneath the frame, because I like to sit under there and watch that needle come in and out of the fabric. And a lot of times if you bump the quilt, the ladies would stick their fingers, and then you would get into really big trouble, and Mom would, get after me to get out from underneath the quilting frame. But those are my earliest memories of quilting that I can remember. The quilt that I'm making right now is for my youngest son. I've made probably 6 quilts altogether. I've made each one of my kids a quilt, and I have machine pieced them, and I am now doing the hand stitching. I enjoy quilting because it is relaxation for me. I can also design quilts the way I want them to look, the colors I want to use. I can use my imagination. It allows me to be creative and create something that will live on way past my years. This is the first t-shirt quilt that I designed. I made this one for myself using my kids and my Trojan t-shirts. I designed this myself, and I took it to the county fair one year and won first place in that category. I tie my t-shirt quilts. That way they're more like a comforter instead of an actual quilt, and I also use blanket fleece that makes them heavier and warmer. Once I got into making quilts, I decided to enter a competition, which was the Crawford County Fair. And the first quilt I took was the quilt that I made for my son. I got second place on it for hand quilting. And the second quilt I entered was the O'Toole Family Crest quilt. It was a white on white quilt. The whole thing was hand quilted. And on that one, I won second place overall. And I also got the award, the Little Balkans Award, for Best Hand Quilted by an Individual. I was very proud of that ribbon. They don't give too many of those out. Only one person in the whole county can win that. The next quilt I entered was my daughter's safari quilt. I won Reserve Grand Champion, first place for hand quilting. I then went on to win the Reserve Grand Champion overall quilts, and I also won the Best Hand Quilted by Individual Award a second year in a row. I also entered this quilt into the Little Balkans Days quilt show. I didn't end up placing a ribbon that year. There were so many entries that it was very hard for the judges to even pick the winners. In my cupboard I have several bolts of fabric fleece, blanket fleece that I use for these t-shirt quilts. And in my closet I have 2 rolls of quilt batting. One is like 30 yards. For those that would like to learn how to quilt, the best thing would be to get online and watch videos, look at how-to books, and then actually start a project. But I would start a small project, because to make a huge quilt takes approximately a year to make if you hand quilt it. My future plans are to get a big quilting machine someday, and then I can just machine quilt all of my quilts, and they will be a lot higher quality.